Imagine a secret so dangerous that it could literally topple a dynasty, hidden in the most mundane, unexpected place you could think of, a simple beer barrel. We're talking about a clandestine message that promised an imprisoned queen her long-awaited freedom and a clear path back to the throne. But there was a deadly catch. Mary, Queen of Scots, had absolutely no idea that every single word she was writing was being carefully read, copied, and manipulated by her greatest enemy. It only took one tiny, forged postscript to transform a daring rescue mission into an inescapable death warrant. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking the absolute deadliest game of cat and mouse in royal history. So, how exactly does a beer barrel kill a queen? It's a wild question, right? But answering it takes us deep into a 16th century sting operation that honestly feels like a modern-day spy thriller. Today, we're going to see how a single piece of paper destroyed a dynasty and exactly why you should never, ever trust a so-called secure secret. The mechanics of this betrayal are an absolute masterclass in espionage, orchestrated by what many historians consider the world's very first true spymaster. Part 1. A queen in a cage. The target and the trap setter. Okay, to really grasp how this intricate trap was set, we first have to understand the intense, high-stakes political tension of the year 1586. The vibe in England at this time was suffocating. We're talking rampant paranoia, constantly shifting loyalties, and the very real everyday threat of assassination. 19. That is the agonizing number of years Mary Stuart had been a prisoner in England by this point. I mean, try to put yourself in her shoes for just a second. Nearly 2 decades locked away in cold stone rooms, just watching the world pass by through heavy iron bars. Over those 19 years, she was aging, her health was rapidly declining, and she was entirely isolated from her loyal supporters. She was a caged queen, and absolute desperation was really beginning to set in. The conflict at the heart of the story is basically an impossible stalemate. From Queen Elizabeth I's view, Mary wasn't just a cousin, she was a walking, talking threat. As a Catholic figurehead with a super strong, legitimate claim to the English throne, Mary inspired pretty much every rebel and assassin who wanted Elizabeth dead. So Elizabeth's fear, completely justified. But Mary's reality was far bleaker. Like we said, she's aging, isolated, sick, and incredibly desperate for a way out. We've got 2 monarchs locked in a completely impossible situation. Elizabeth couldn't let Mary go, but she also absolutely refused to execute her own royal cousin without undeniable, rock-solid proof of a crime. Enter this man, Sir Francis Walsingham. He was Queen Elizabeth's spymaster, and he understood the assignment perfectly. Walsingham knew that as long as Mary lived, Elizabeth was in mortal danger. But since Elizabeth demanded proof of a crime before she would act, Walsingham realized he couldn't just sit back and wait to discover a betrayal. He needed to build one. He had to manufacture the perfect crime from scratch. To do this, he moves Mary to a place called Chartley Hall. And this wasn't just a random relocation. Chartley was this highly controlled environment where Walsingham could monitor every single person she spoke to and every single letter she received. His psychological strategy was brilliant, but undeniably cruel. He was going to give Mary just enough hope to make her reckless. Part 2. The Beer Barrel Cipher, Engineering the Sting Operation.
Walsingham knows that to catch Mary, she has to believe she's outsmarting him, so he engineers this highly sophisticated sting operation using something incredibly ordinary. He secretly allows a local brewer, who by the way was actually on his payroll, to smuggle letters in and out of the estate. First, the messages were hidden inside the hollowed-out, waterproof bung of a large beer barrel. It seemed ingenious. Mary honestly believed she had finally found a secure, completely undetectable way to communicate with the outside world. But in reality, every single letter was being intercepted by Walsingham and handed straight to his expert codebreaker, Thomas Philippus. Philippus would decipher the messages, copy them word for word, and only then send the original letters on their way to Mary. She thought she was wrapped up in this perfect cloak of secrecy, while her greatest enemy was literally reading over her shoulder the entire time.
Through this completely compromised beer barrel channel, Mary starts communicating with a young, wealthy, and super idealistic Catholic guy named Anthony Babington. Now, Babington was completely outmatched by Walsingham's intelligence network, but his ambition was massive. His plan basically had 3 main components: a foreign invasion, a widespread Catholic uprising, and the dispatch, which was their polite little word for the assassination of Queen Elizabeth. Walsingham just sits at his desk and watches this entire plot grow. He lets it develop because he's waiting for the ultimate prize: Mary's explicit, written consent to the murder of the Queen. Without that in her own handwriting, he has nothing. Part 3. The Forged Postscript, a masterclass in betrayal. The tension finally peaks in the summer of 1586, and this is where the trap requires a little creative engineering. On July 17th, Mary finally takes the bait and writes back to Babington. In her letter, she approves the rescue mission, and she approves the uprising. But Mary was smart. You don't survive 19 years as a prisoner without being cautious. She carefully, deliberately avoids explicitly mentioning the assassination of Elizabeth anywhere in the main text of her letter. She gave Walsingham a conspiracy, sure, but she didn't give him the smoking gun he actually needed for an execution. Mary's caution essentially forced the spymaster's hand, leading to an act of dark historical art. Walsingham's codebreaker, Thomas Philippus, doesn't just decode the letter, he actually alters it. He carefully forges a postscript right at the bottom of Mary's letter, perfectly mimicking her handwriting. The forgery read, "Describe to me the names of the 6 gentlemen." He was asking Babington for the specific names of the 6 men assigned to kill Elizabeth. Babington, receiving this letter and totally believing his queen had personally asked for the assassins' names, proudly provided them in his reply. Boom. With those names in hand, Walsingham had everything. He had the plan, the identities of the assassins, and Mary's own handwriting seemingly requesting the details of the murder. The trap snaps shut with brutal efficiency. Babington and his conspirators were immediately arrested, subjected to horrific torture, and executed in the most brutal ways permitted by 16th century law. But the true, gut-wrenching tragedy of this moment, the real target, Mary, remained sitting in her stone room at Shartley Hall, completely unaware that her entire network had just been annihilated, just waiting for a rescue that was never, ever going to come.
Part 4. The Final Acts. The Legal Assassination.
The groundwork is laid, the evidence is completely manufactured, and the target is cornered. From here, Mary's world unravels at terrifying speed. In July 1586, the fatal letter trap snaps shut with that forged postscript. Just 3 months later, in October, Mary stands trial. And she actually defends herself brilliantly in that dark, crowded courtroom. She argues that as a foreign sovereign queen, she isn't even subject to English law. Honestly, it was an incredibly strong defense, until Walsingham dramatically produces the letters. Mary rightfully claims they were forgeries. But remember, we're in 1586. In an age way before forensic science, a queen's word was simply no match for a piece of paper held in the hands of the state. Elizabeth hesitated for months, totally paralyzed by the thought of killing a fellow monarch. But finally, she signs the death warrant, leading us right to February 1587. On February 8th, 1587, Mary walks to the scaffold, and she makes this incredibly powerful final statement by dressing head to toe in liturgical red. That's the traditional color of Catholic martyrdom. She was actively turning her legal execution into a religious sacrifice. The execution itself, though, was gruesome. It took the executioner 3 desperate strikes of the heavy iron axe to finally finish the job. And then came a deeply poignant, almost cinematic moment. When the executioner lifted her head by the hair to show the crowd, her auburn wig fell away. It revealed her true, closely cropped gray hair. It was a stark visual testament to the immense, crushing stress she had endured during her 19-year imprisonment. So, the crucial point we need to take away is this. Sir Francis Walsingham won. He successfully eliminated the absolute greatest threat to Queen Elizabeth's reign, but he didn't do it on a battlefield. He achieved a cold-blooded legal assassination built entirely on a hollowed-out beer barrel, the skills of a brilliant codebreaker, and a few forged words added to the bottom of a piece of paper. It is honestly one of history's most terrifying examples of how something you trust completely, like a secure line of communication, can be totally hijacked and weaponized against you. Which leaves us with this final, really fascinating thought to consider. Mary, Queen of Scots, was ultimately betrayed by her own desperate hope for freedom. But looking at the man who pulled the strings, Sir Francis Walsingham, how do we judge him? Was he a patriotic hero doing whatever it took to protect his nation and his queen from very real, existential threats? Or was he a villain, a man who crossed a severe moral line by forging evidence to legally murder a royal cousin? It's one of history's great gray areas, a ridiculously complex web of duty, deception, and survival. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, whether in the 16th century or today, choose your words carefully. They can be a bridge, or they can be a gallows.